My name is Iam Tucker. Of course, Dr. Shervinack, this is my Enseava podcast. We're doing a video today. Of course, this is for Poli-Sci 4650 Southern Politics. So the instructions were to interview an actor in Southern politics of some sort. I chose to interview my father because he has been involved in the South and in politics for quite a long time. And so I'm going to allow him to introduce himself first and just, Dad, please let everyone know who you are and a little bit about your background in politics.
Great. Thanks. Let me just say going in that I'm exceptionally proud of my daughter. If it sounds self-serving to the extent of being a parent, then bear with me. My name is Robert H. Tucker Jr., known throughout this community as Bob Tucker. I got started back in the day, as they say. I went to public schools here in New Orleans. Went to Walter L. Cohen, where I did okay in academics, played quarterback on the football team. Decided to leave New Orleans for a chance to kind of spread my wings and moved into Atlanta. Academically speaking, I went to Clark College, got a scholarship up there.
What year was that at?
That was in 1959 when I finished up. Okay. And at Clark, I decided that environment was a great environment because Ides of March of 1960, we pulled off the first sit-in that Atlanta had known. Yes, the prior sit-in had been at North Carolina A&T, and people kept saying, well, Atlanta, you're so progressive, when are you going to do something? And so we were blessed. Dr. King, being from that region and that area, was the person who helped to create the, if you will, spiritual and political infrastructure, but it was his brother, A.D. King, who was a student at Gammon Theological Seminary, who became the tactical guy. So we, out of 6,000 students in that collective, if you will, of schools, Clark, Morehouse, Spelman, Morris Brown, Atlanta University, and Gammon Theological Center. Out of that roughly 6,000 students, 110 of us were hand-selected. So at nights, we would go to a designated location. We were actually taken back to, upon Dr. King's instructions, back to Jesus Christ and brought up on the philosophy of nonviolent resistance, and in between that, of course, Gandhi. Mm-hmm. And so the day of reckoning came. We were not informed until the day before. And we hit 11 different places in Atlanta, all at the same time. The black film directors provided transportation for us. Mm-hmm. We were taken, our place was Strayberry's Federal Cafeteria, which as I understand it, is still in existence in Atlanta.
Wow. Have you been back since?
No, I haven't.
We want to go sit at the counter?
So what we did was it was a cafeteria style. Okay. So we unloaded through the courtesy of the film directors. Mm-hmm. And the 11 of us snaked our way in around to where the food was, and actually it was African American help. Right. They caught on very quickly, more so than the people that were there. That's what was going on. So someone instructed them immediately to pick up the food. Okay. So Julian Bond was in front of me. I began, and he also put about 6 or 7 Jell-Os and iced teas on trays and salads so we could pass them back. Right. And everyone would have something to eat. Right. Only tense moment, I guess, was the manager came out, and in a very strange fashion, he put a leather cover over the cash register, and then he said, I wish I had my gun. I guess that was supposed to have intimidated us, but by that time we had snaked around to where you're supposed to pay for your food, cafeteria style. Yeah. So we had been instructed in the run-up to this by the group of folks that Dr. King had assigned to us, seniors really from Atlanta University, is how to talk to them. Well, sir, most of us have afternoon classes, and once we get something to eat, we'll be out of your way.
And this place is all whites only?
All whites, yeah.
Wow.
And in fact, at the table where I was standing, there was a group of 4 Southern white ladies. And I heard one, as I was standing there, say, "Ooh, we said this must be National NAACP Day. I ain't never seen this many niggas in all my life." You know,
wow.
Well, I wanted to, but it was a serious moment.
Of
obviously.
course, yeah, yeah.
And so, as we were waiting, the manager re-entered and said, by this time, he had done another strange thing. He had a large piece of canvas placed over the outside window. I guess that was to discourage people from seeing what was happening on the inside. And the question was raised by someone who said, "Well, where's the wagon to come pick them up?" And so by that time, the police finally arrived. And under our arms, we had Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Aristotle. We were simply waiting to be served so we could get back to school.
Absolutely.
We were ushered out, put up against the wall outside, and searched. And the lieutenant was asked by the captain. He said, well, where's the wagon to take them in?" He said, "Well, they've hit all over town. We don't have any way to take them in." So we were taken to jail. And at that point, there were observers whose job was to get the badge numbers. This is before cell phones now and cell phone photographs.
Right.
To get the badges of any officers that did anything.
Very strategic.
So we were booked and released. We were jailed because we violated a no trespass ordinance that was on the books there in Atlanta.
Jim Crow trespass.
Exactly. And so that was my first experience at that level. While home, prior to going to school, I'd participated, like many of us did, banging on doors trying to get our folks registered to vote.
Absolutely.
It's interesting that once we were released, we went back to school, and then we subsequently began to pick other targets. For example, we decided, this is the student activist aspect of the movement, that we would picket Riches because black women could not try on hats. There were white and colored water fountains. Riches was the Macy's of Atlanta.
Okay.
And so on one particular weekend, a Saturday, we had 3 concentric lines going, picketing lines. We were picketing Riches. Ku Klux Klan was picketing us. Police were in between.
Jeez.
And so those efforts, and one day it went from a major department store down to a smaller level facility, but the student activism was what gave life to the movement. So I came up in that. My senior year, I was going to graduate and move on, and there was a recruiter from President Kennedy's administration, his brother Bobby. There were no blacks in the National Park Service.
Okay.
So they were going around to HBCUs to try and see if there were blacks that might be interested. I was selected.
That's great.
Got sent out to Yosemite National Park.
So what was your degree in when you graduated from Clark?
Political science and a minor in psychology.
What was it that you felt like you wanted to do during that? What was your state of mind of why you wanted to major in poli-sci back then?
I had come up, as most African-American men at that era, in a completely segregated Solid South.
Yep.
My first 6 years of my life were spent in Bogalusa, Louisiana. Bogalusa, Louisiana is a mill town, literally the home of the Ku Klux Klan in those days.
Amy Parish?
It's Washington Parish.
Washington Parish, I'm sorry.
And the home of the Deacons for Defense and Justice.
Okay.
And so we had seen about a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
And so Bogalusa was my first exposure to what it was like in a small town that was infested with Ku Klux Klansmen and just raw prejudice.
Do you have any experiences that you remember even as a child or in between there dealing with the Klan in that area?
Only that the high sheriff, as they called him, that there was the usual charge of a white woman being raped by a black man. And the sheriff was making, at 3 a.m, a house-to-house search, and he came, and I was 11 or 10, and our funeral home and our residence were one and the same,
Right.
with the dividing wall. And I recall the sheriff telling my daddy that why he was there and that he needed to search the house. And my daddy said, whoever you're looking for is not in here. And you're not going to invade this home at 3 a.m, searching for someone who's not here. And I have a Winchester 30-30 here that assures you that you will not come through here.
Very convincing.
So God turned around and left, and that was kind of indelibly, and I said, well, that was pretty bold of my daddy to do that.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
But there are 3 classes of African Americans who did not have to fear economic reprisals from the white society in terms of their involvement in the movement. And this is both in a general and in a specific sense. One was black preachers, because they did not depend on the white power structure.
Right.
2 were black funeral directors, and 3 black barbers and beauty personnel that worked in their own shops. And so those 3 had a sort of protection against the inability to feed their families if the worst.
And Papa was an undertaker.
He was both. He in later years became an AME preacher.
Right.
Some people would suggest that he kind of caught him coming and going, from birth to burial. But that's
it's one way to do it.
That's a different story.
And so, of course, during those times, of course, his only clientele was black.
Exactly.
So
exactly. He had 3
same thing
funeral
like
homes.
what you're saying. Yeah.
Right. So he didn't have. So that was what got us through school.
So how do you think that during these volatile periods, and especially with everything going on today in my generation, and it feels like from the stories that I've heard from you over time and the documentaries that we watch and everything that we learn, it almost seems in some aspects like history is repeating itself. And I'm going to come back to that, but not so much as of course it was way worse during those days. And I just think about all of the different leaders that were assassinated during the time when you're fighting for civil rights, and every time you think you have a leader that's actually able to speak up, they're taken down. Yeah. What do you think, and how do you think those experiences shaped your from then political future and your foray into politics? Even how has that changed over time?
We became hardwired for understanding what it meant to be black.
Yeah.
For example, my daddy we would go to black funeral directors conventions nationally in Chicago, New York, California. So we had to prepare as we drove. Couldn't fly in those days, couldn't take trains,
Not even trains, huh?
It was a stretch. You could get in one coach, you couldn't, that was where brown bagging came from.
Course,
you couldn't
absolutely.
eat in the dining car and whatever.
Yeah.
But at any rate, so all of the barriers were a part of our daily life. And so it became, for me, when I got to the point of coming into a much larger understanding of all of this, when I matured into government with the Landry administration, that I want to come back to that.
Okay.
But my sense of things was that struggle was just a part of daily life for black people. And what it did for me was to make me aware and always to be alert in terms of moving around as to what and how quick things could happen.
Absolutely.
And also to develop an abiding commitment to trying to make it better for the people who are going to come behind us. And so
that's huge. I mean, it's like Dr. Cornel West said, like black people have to have a dual consciousness all the time. That's something not everybody else has to have.
Yeah.
Not only do you have to be aware of yourself when you walk in somewhere. You got to be aware of how everyone else is perceiving you,
Right.
and whether or not you're a threat as a black man back then, whether you look like it or not, no matter what. And then on top of that, that's at a physical level. And then at the same time, that awareness on every other level above that.
Yeah.
You know.
So that ingraining of struggle and empowerment into my DNA carried through to the time that I became a part of the land administration. When I got back so I finished school, went through that experience, National Park Service as a ranger, decided to stay in California for a while with the guy that was my center when I played quarterback at school. He said, man, this is a different world out here. There's no segregation. And, you know, I said, man, it's all different than it was down there in New Orleans at home. So that was kind of cool, and we would hang out and party a lot. And then on the day, everybody knows where they were the day when Kennedy was assassinated. And we were hanging out. And when it happened, when I learned of it, it was a seminal moment in my life, because it was one of the few times that there was a sort of element of, I've always been decisive because that was how we came up.
Right.
But that moment it was a big left hook to me. And so I thought about it, and then it came clear to me. What he had said, as not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. So I said, I'm joining the military. My friends didn't believe me. They said, man, we rolling out there. You mean you're going to join the Army? Are you crazy? I said, yeah. They didn't believe me till that morning that I got on a train, left L.A. and rode for Fort Ord, California, where I went through basic combat training in the Army. Then got sent back to South Carolina to Fort Jackson for advanced infantry training, and then came down on orders for France, a little place called Orleans. Got sent there, and didn't like that because the Algerian-French War had gone down. I looked Algerian, and that was not good. So I volunteered for Vietnam. Get out of there. Came down on orders. Got sent to a little jungle outpost up in Thailand, a little place called Korat, Thailand. Spent a year there, and then ultimately came back home, honorably discharged, and came back to New Orleans, and I found New Orleans the same as it was when I had left.
What year was it now about?
This was 1962, 63, 64, 65, in that range. Got back here, and we determined that, and Dr. King had been assassinated, so it had to be at 68. So we convened a group at the old French hospital on Orleans Avenue. I was working with Irving at that time, a guy, myself and John Hampton and Larry Cager. We determined that there had to be something that we would say and do to commemorate the death of Dr. King. So we decided that we would march. And so we convened in a room, Republic of New Africa activists, Black Panther Party members, Catholic nuns, Baptist preachers, folks that were just interested. And we argued for 4 hours about whose method was the most efficient method for addressing this empowerment issue and what we were going to do and what we're going to do and where we're going to go forward. So finally, we began to argue about something that made some sense. And that was the mule that was going to pull the caisson with the replica of Dr. King. So somebody said, man, there's a mule that we can get from the guy back of town. He's got a mule. And the guy said, well, no, we have to use a 2x4 on that mule. Then the guy said, well, it's a mule. Vegetable wagons were still prominent in New Orleans. So we get this mule. So we marched, got that mule, marched from Orleans Avenue, Old French Hospital, down to the foot of Canal Street, came back up by City Hall. We had 10 non-negotiable demands, any 9 of which we would have readily negotiated if anyone had listened to us. So we had sent registered letters to all of the officials at City Hall, the mayor, City Council. Nobody showed up. We put in place the 10 demands at the door of City Hall, a la Edict of Worms. And as we were pulling off the march, walking away, I noticed in the breezeway between City Hall and Civil District Court a guy standing there. Didn't say anything. It was Moon Landrieu.
Wow.
He simply watched. So several weeks later, my father, who at this time was, in addition to running his funeral home, he was also pastoring in the Lower Ninth Ward, Bethel AME Church.
Right.
He said, called me, he said, this guy Landrieu wants to talk to you. He wants to see if you would be willing to help him. He wants to run for mayor. Met with Landrieu, talked. We came together. I did some political organizing, some writing for him. He ran and won. As you know, there was a similar debate in which he and the former lieutenant governor, the question was asked, would you hire black folks? Lieutenant governor said he would hire black qualified people. Qualified meant whites.
Right.
Moon didn't draw a breath and said yes. He was elected, and we spent 8 years together.
I knew that we couldn't continue to be an active city of any consequence, unless we began to use all of our assets, which included both black and white. And we began to integrate City Hall with very competent people who really exceeded the competency of the people, the whites who were there before them. But it took a lot of effort on behalf of not only those coming in, but those who were already in City Hall to make this adjustment, because for the first time you had whites who were in fairly high positions taking orders from blacks, which they had never done in their life.
What was your position under Moon?
I was, he had first offered me a position. There were no blacks in City Hall. This was, the mayor's race of 1970 was the most critical mayor's race in the history of New Orleans. It was when blacks, women, gays, people who were outside the circle of acceptance in the city of New Orleans were brought in. And so after the victory, Moon said, look, he said, I'm going to make a department head. He said, sanitation department, I'm going to start there. So I said, I don't think so, Mayor.
No thanks.
I said, I'm not interested in picking up garbage. So he kind of looked at me and said, it's ungrateful, son. So I said, what else you got, man? He said, well, I'm going to have 3 executive assistants. One was his brother-in-law, the other was a guy by the name of Dan McClung, who was actor. I said, I'll take one of them.
Awesome.
So I did, and
you got to be very instrumental. I know, the stories. I wish we had more time for you to be able to elaborate on the showdown and the desire that you were charged, and who else was with you? Don Hubbard.
Charlie Elwha, Sherman was with us for a while, Johnny Jackson.
Absolutely, and those pictures are amazing, and they speak volumes, and especially y'all walking in. I mean, y'all look like some bad mofos walking in there.
I am one quick comment about that, because it goes back to what you said, how I was impacted by this civil rights having come up in the heart of not only the movement, but in a family and in an environment that was infested with the need for us as blacks to liberate ourselves out of this. When 6 months after we were in office, we were convened in a 3 a.m. meeting in the mayor's conference room, and it was because the New Orleans Police Department had determined that the Black Panther Party, which had created a cell in the Desire Project, that they needed to be evicted. And so I was the only person that had a B on his license, driver's license, in the room at the time. And somebody volunteered me to go with the mayor to police headquarters to make sure the
Who was chief then?
Chief Giarusso, Clarence Giarusso.
Clarence Giarusso, okay.
So I told the mayor that was not going to work, and the mayor was upset, to say the least. He said, well, when Raynack was doing all this crazy stuff, a few of us folks stood up for your people, and so your people got to stand up for us. So I asked if we could step off in the office to the side, and we did, and in fairly, to some extent, colorful language, I explained to the mayor that was not going to work. I was not hired as a military advisor. I had lived in Desire prior to us winning for about 4.5 days with a guy by the name of Henry Fagan, God bless him, who was the mayor, father of 11, the mayor, quote, of desire,
Right.
who's not deceased. And so I understood it. It was an intolerable situation. There were rats the size of cats. When it rained, because there was no drainage, it's a part of the design of desire. Kids were swimming in polio-infested waters. And the Panthers were providing the services that the city should have been providing.
Right.
They provided when women had to go get their welfare checks and all. So I said, Mr. Mayor, I said, ain't gonna work. I said, I told him, you know, what could happen with the job, what he could do with it. And
Right.
said that I would, so I said, I'm walking out and I'm hopefully gonna be able to intervene and ensure that no lives are lost. 260 cops were brought into Desire. And I and the other folks whose names called spent the better half of the day mediating between the mayor, the cops. Cops ultimately pulled out, Panthers came out, and there were no deaths.
No shots fired.
No.
That is an
Yeah.
amazing story. I do want to make sure that I want to ask you two more questions that I think are very important. And that I really can't wait to hear your answer on. What patterns and similarities do you see from the political scene of the 60s and today, especially as it relates to Southern politics in the United States? What similarities do you see from then and now?
This is Jim Crow 2.0, or either 3.0, whichever way, if you want to throw Reconstruction in, it's 2.0. But anyway, you cut it. And we see the efforts of the structure to intimidation has always been the way by which you try and snuff out the best and brightest efforts of people who are trying to achieve through whatever means necessary or the means at the time. Intimidation is all. And so now we see the instruments of government being utilized. In those days, there were these no trespass laws and you could be arrested. But thanks to Dutch Morial and A.P. Turo and a number of our heroes, they were able to go into the courts and get relief. This is before courts got packed. They were already all white to begin with.
Right.
But at least you could argue the law and sometimes come out at the appellate level. So the efforts to intimidate were there. I think that where we are now is that we are becoming very sophisticated, and there's a lot of good things that are going on in terms of the movement. Whites that are now joining in, maybe coming off of having adopted black rap.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that have been adopted.
You know, and they see, they see these people ain't too bad, man. They're pretty cool, and let's help them out, and have to make sure that that doesn't bleed into a paternalistic approach to life.
Absolutely.
Has to be a blend of these old school strategies with new school tactics. And so there are some similarities, but this is a different environment. Women are more intimately involved. And what I've learned over time is that there are people who are willing to look and figure out where are the most vulnerable parts. You cannot simply jump up and say, let's go do this. One thing you have to be concerned about for all of the activists out there, you have to assume if you're having an open meeting in a big, a convocation of folks, one is that they're going to be provocateurs in there and they're going to be spies.
Absolutely.
That will be talking and taking your business back.
Absolutely.
So we were always conscious of that. And in fact, there was a program that the government, COINTELPRO, where they specifically inserted provocateurs in that would raise the bar. We would say, let's go knock on doors to get voter registration. And then it would say, well, let's go blow up a bridge, I mean, a lot of that happened. And you see some of that now. You see that there have been provocateurs in some of these situations.
Absolutely.
The other thing is that a pressure point that we need to look at working now that was not available to us in this larger way are these Fortune 500 corporations. And that goes to making sure that they understand that they have an obligation. Their obligation is a much bigger. It's to the shareholders,
Absolutely.
to the consumers,
Yeah.
and to the people that keep them rolling.
think Rouse's is learning that lesson here in New Orleans very
exactly.
very swiftly.
So that part of it has to be strategically worked.
Yeah.
And you have to come up with creative strategies. And as I was saying earlier, you got to get in the room and you got to get to the table.
Absolutely.
And when you get to the table, you don't bang on the table with your shoe or with a hammer. You speak and you think and you act in strategically and critically stealthy ways, but make sure you're getting it done.
Absolutely. I think that, one thing that I noticed, and I was looking this up before I came here when I was sending some information, the women of today are leading the civil rights movement, especially on the part of black folk, and fighting for things that if it was another side of something, it'd be an epidemic. Like, for instance, black women dying during childbirth right now.
Yeah.
These numbers are phenomenal. It's ridiculous, and black women that aren't being taken seriously. But to see the Stacey Abrams and the Tamika Mallory's of the Black Lives Matter movements really looking around and seeing nobody else is saying or doing this in the right way, let's get strategic, and then look at the movement from Black Lives Matter movement, just her getting involved in one case, and then just spilling it over. And I watched a talk that she had on Red Table Talk the other day about how it evolved into what Black Lives Matter is today, and it's amazing, and how she has daggers on her back from everybody constantly. But I like to hear about what you're talking about and compare it to today and hear about it. And this kind of leads me into my last question, which you really kind of answered a little bit more of, but I'd love to hear more of what you think about it. But again, what advice and guidance would you give young people of today who want to see a more equitable America? What advice would you specifically give young folk in the South, black or white?
Right.
Or anybody, ally or foe, a warning to a foe, advice to allies on how to be allies, good allies to us in the movement. Any advice you have on anything like that?
Let me just set the stage for it. A.Z. Young said back in 1967, he said, there is a penalty for shooting birds out of season, but no penalty for killing black men. Okay. And so there is a realignment of black consciousness that's occurring, that's opening up the portal and the envelope for participation. And inside of that realignment, there are new constituencies being created. They're black mothers, they're black grandmas, and black men are now, and the centerpiece of this realignment of black consciousness is our young black men and women. And how do they manipulate their existence and work their existence through where they can walk the streets freely without intimidation, where they can look to have families, where they can be able to help take care of their grandparents? How does that, and what's happening is that under the law of, we call it the law of consequences, of unintended consequences.
Right.
That the people who are doing all of this stuff, these legislatures that are passing all of this suppression
Voter
foolishness,
suppression, it's ridiculous.
and for members of Congress who are bold enough to suggest that the insurrection didn't occur, that these were tourists.
Like, well, our lying eyes, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Our lying eyes. Yeah.
And so as they do that, they are thickening out this envelope of participation. And so at the end of the day, for a parking lot at Reagan Airport, Congressman X, you're gonna check your integrity at the door. So what will be on your tombstone?
Yeah.
You know, what will be on your tombstone? And so we have to ask that same, because legacy, interesting enough, the L word is still as important as the I word, integrity.
Absolutely.
And so for those people who happen to be non-black, and for blacks who happen to be non-activists, that are participating and taking all this in, questions going to be asked, Grandma,
What did you do?
Daddy, what did you do
Absolutely.
during that war?
What did you do?
So the need for us to participate, to do more than just moan and groan, to get off our asses. And the more that let me tell you, Newton got it right. His third law was that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction.
Yeah.
And that's what's starting to happen, I believe, in this realignment of Black consciousness. And we're taking in more folks. And interesting enough, some of this voter suppression stuff is going to take in some of their people.
Absolutely.
Some of their folks that they didn't intend.
I hope so.
So the laws of spirit to the universe don't sleep.
Yeah, you're right.
Hey, now.
And you know, especially Dad, when you said it about, you know, legacy and history books are being written right now.
Yeah.
And the movement and the strategicness of it, like you're saying, in a holistic way, really, really needs to think even bigger because they're getting even more creative.
Yeah.
You know, these Republicans obviously are getting language from ALEC, or I don't know who it is, nationwide, and trying to introduce this language regarding what can and can't be taught. This nationalist language about so you're literally trying to rewrite history books. Yeah. And I mean, revisionist history has now become a front and center.
Oh yeah.
They're owning it.
Yeah.
And so that's great points that you make. I thank you for your time on this. We could sit here and do probably 6 more series of this and take it on 10 different topics, and I would love to do that. But I do appreciate your time. I love you. DNA runs deep because we have a lot of similarities in the fight.
Let the church say amen.
Absolutely. And I, you know, when it comes to also to Southern politics, and I love the fact that in these past 5, well, longer than that. I mean, Lord, you've been taking me to political debates behind the scenes since Mark was debating Donald Mintz at WVUE. Yeah. But especially to be able to be in the fight together. For LaToya, for Mayor Cantrell, and all the rest of them, it's great to be able to have our strategies, old and new, and for me to be able to learn it and for us to be able to fight together, that's an honor. And so
I'm proud of you.
I appreciate it. I'm proud of you.